Here are some few problems we'll try to solve using the formula for z-test for a proportion. Problem number 1. People who are trying to avoid trans fat. A dietitian claims that 60% of people are trying to avoid trans fats in their diets. She randomly selected 200 people and found that 128 people stated that they were trying to avoid trans fats in their diets. At alpha of 0.05, is there enough evidence to reject the dietitian's claim? Following our format previously, Step 1. State the hypothesis and identify the claim. We have the null and alternative hypothesis. Our null hypothesis should be 0.60, which is our claim. And our alternative hypothesis should not be equal to 0.60. Step 2. Find the critical values. Since our alternative hypothesis is not equal to a number, the test will be two-tailed. We have an alpha of 0.05, but since the test is two-tailed, we are going to divide the alpha by 2, and that is 0.025. We are going to put 0.025 on each side of the tail, and the remaining unshaded part, which is the 95% or 0.95. In order to get the critical values, we are going to add 0.95 and 0.025, and we will going to look it from the table E. 0.9750 is 1.9 and 0.06. That is equal to 1.96. So means that our critical value is 1.96. We are going to put it on the end of the tail, which is negative 1.96 and positive 1.96. And this critical value should be our based on how to reject or not reject a null hypothesis. Step 3. Compute the test value. We are going to use the formula for z-test for a proportion. Z is equals to p hat minus p over the square root of pq over n. First, we are going to identify the given. P should be 0.60 since our claim is 60%. Q should be the alternative of P, which is 1 minus 0.60, and that is 0.40. P hat is not stated on the problem, so we are going to solve for it. From the problem, she randomly selected 200 people and found that 128 people stated that they were trying to avoid trans fats. We have found here the N or the population, which is 200, and the respondents X is 128. Since the P hat is equal to X over N, we are going to substitute the values. P hat is equal to 128 over 200, and that is equal to 64. Our final given P hat is 64. Next, we substitute the formula. That is 64 minus 0.60 over the square root of 0.60 times 0.40 over 200, and that is equal to 1.15. Step 4. Make a decision to reject or not reject the hypothesis. Since our critical values is 1.96 each tail, and the test value 1.15 did not fall to critical region, therefore, the null hypothesis cannot be rejected. Step 5. Summarize the result. From the z-test for a proportion we have performed, we can conclude that there is not enough evidence to reject the claim that 60% of people are trying to avoid trans fats in their diets. Problem number 2. Replacing $1 bills with $1 coins. A statistician read that at least 77% of the population oppose replacing $1 bills with $1 coins. To see if the claim is valid, the statistician selected a sample of 80 people and found that 55 were opposed to replacing the $1 bills. At alpha of 0.01, test the claim that at least 77% of the population are opposed to the change. Step 1. State the hypothesis and identify the claim. We have the null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. Our claim should be 77%, and that will be 0.77 null hypothesis. And since the problem says at least 77%, our alternative hypothesis should be less than 0.77. Step 2. Find the critical values. Since the alternative hypothesis is less than a number or less than 0.77, our test will be left-tailed test. We have an alpha of 0.01. We're not going to divide it into 2 anymore since our test is one-tailed. So the remaining 0.99 or the 99%, we are going to locate it at table E. From the table E, it is 2.3 and 0.03. That is 2.33. Our critical values is 2.33. But since it is left-tail test, it should be negative. Our critical values on final is negative 2.33. Step 3. Compute the test value. We're still going to use the formula for z-test for a proportion. Z is equals to p hat minus p over the square root of pq over n. First, we are going to identify the given that we are needing. P should be 0.77 because of 77% claim. And the Q will be the alternative of P, which is 1 minus 0.77, and that is 0.23. P hat is not stated on the problem, so we are going to solve for it. It says that a sample of 80 people found that 55 were opposed to replacing the $1 bills. Here we have found N and X. N is the population, which is 80. X is the respondents, which is the 55. In order to find P hat, we are going to replace or substitute X over N. That is 55 over 80. 55 over 80 is equal to 0.6875, and that is our P hat. Now we are going to substitute the formula. That is 0.6875 minus 0.77 over the square root of 0.77 times 0.23 over 80. That is equal to negative 1.75. Step 4. Make a decision to reject or not reject the hypothesis. From our figure from step 2, the critical value is negative 2.33. We are going to locate negative 1.75. Since the test value is negative 1.75 did not fall to critical region negative 2.33, therefore, we cannot reject the null hypothesis. Step 5. Summarize the result. There is not enough evidence to reject the claim that at least 77% of the populations oppose replacing $1 bills with $1 coins. Problem number 3. Attorney advertisement. An attorney claims that more than 25% of all lawyers advertise. A sample of 200 lawyers in a certain city showed that 63 had used some form of advertising. At alpha of 0.05, is there enough evidence to support the attorney's claim? Step 1. State the hypothesis and identify the claim. Here we should have null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. Our claim for null hypothesis should be 0.25, and the alternative hypothesis should be greater than 0.25. Step 2. Compute for the test value. We'll be identifying the given P, Q, and P hat. From the problem, 25% P should be 0.25, and Q is the alternative of Q, which is 1 minus 0.25, and that is 0.75. P hat is not required, so we are going to solve for it. From the problem, it says, a sample of 200 lawyers in a certain city showed that 63 had used some form of advertising. Here we have N and X. N is the population, which is 200. X are the responders, which is 63. In order to solve P hat, we'll be using X over N, that is 63 over 200. 63 over 200 is equal to 0.315. So the value of our P hat is 0.315. Next, we substitute for the formula. Within this case, we're still going to use the formula for z-test for a proportion. Z is equals to P hat minus P over the square root of PQ over N. That is 0.315 minus 0.25 over the square root of 0.25 times 0.75 over 200. And that should be equal to 2.12. Step 3. Find the p-value. We'll find the area instead because we have the critical values already. From the table, it is 0.9830. Now the area under the curve for z, 2.12, is 0.9830. Now we are going to subtract it from 1. 1 minus 0.9830 is equal to 0.0170. And that should be our p-value. Step 4. Reject the null hypothesis, since 0.017 is less than 0.05. Look at the table. Our test value falls under the critical region, which is 0.05. Step 5. Summarize the result. Since the test value fell on the critical region, we have the power to reject the null hypothesis. Therefore, we can conclude that there is not enough evidence to support the attorney's claim that more than 25% of the lawyers use some form of advertising. That is all for today. Thank you.